Okay, let's dive in. You know that feeling, right? Stepping into the world of travel. There's that buzz of anticipation, maybe a little flutter of nerves, especially when you're facing signs, announcements, or conversations in a language that feels, well, a bit foreign.
Definitely. And airports themselves, they can feel like their own complex universe.
They really are.
And navigating that system successfully, understanding the flow and the language, it makes all the difference between a smooth start to your trip and, wow, a lot of unnecessary stress.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we're exploring today. We've taken the source material, which is this really interesting step-by-step account of one person's solo international journey.
Right. It's almost like a narrative guide for English learners.
Yeah. And we're going to mine it for the absolute essentials.
Our goal isn't just to recap the story, but to extract the practical gold, the key vocabulary, the useful phrases, the actual concrete tips that are embedded within that personal experience.
Like pulling out the cheat sheet you can actually use. So consider this your shortcut to feeling more prepared, more confident, and ready to handle the practical side of airport navigation and flying on your next adventure.
So why is understanding this stuff, this sort of travel English, why is it so crucial?
Well, what's fascinating about the source is how it subtly highlights that contrast, doesn't it? Between the incredible reward of travel, new cultures, new foods, amazing landscapes.
Yeah, all the good stuff.
And the potential stress that the mechanics of travel, especially airports, can introduce.
And language is a huge part of that stress, isn't it?
Right. It's not just about asking for things. It's about understanding what's happening around you.
Precisely. When you grasp the common airport and flight vocabulary, you can follow the announcements, you can understand instructions, anticipate conversations. And that knowledge, it just directly reduces anxiety because you feel more in control. And, well, it builds those basic conversational skills you will need.
Yeah, it's practical whether you're heading off for a vacation, visiting family, or maybe on a business trip. Just knowing how to ask, where is? Or understanding please proceed to gate. It removes a whole layer of guesswork.
Which really brings us to the starting point the source emphasizes. Preparation. Before you even leave the house.
Right.
It uses the example of a solo international flight to Paris. And it frames packing as an art.
An art, not just, shoving things in a bag. Why do you think the source uses that specific word?
Well, I think it's key because it elevates packing from just a chore to a more strategic process. It's about thoughtful selection, organization, like the source details. Versatile clothing, jeans, shirts, a sweater, a jacket, things you can layer. Plus the basics, casual tops, socks, underwear, and those absolutely non-negotiable, comfortable walking shoes.
Oh, definitely. Good shoes are critical.
It's like curating your travel life for that short period.
It's true. And the source is very specific about toiletries, too.
Yes, covering the absolute necessities. Toothbrush, toothpaste, those handy travel-sized bottles of shampoo, conditioner, body wash, deodorant, face wash, moisturizer.
All the basics.
And critically, it reminds you about medications, keeping them in their original packaging, and maybe mentioning a doctor's note if needed. That's a detail that's easy to overlook but can cause big headaches later.
Good point. And electronics are pretty much non-negotiable these days.
For sure. The source lists the essentials. Smartphone, charger, earphones, and adapter.
The adapter.
Yeah, pointing out the need for a European one for the Paris trip example, and a power bank, maybe a camera, all that stuff that keeps you connected and lets you capture memories.
The document checklist is another area where the source is like, these are non-negotiables.
Absolutely. Passport, of course, but the vital tip is ensuring it's valid for at least 6 months beyond your planned stay.
Well, that's a big one. Lots of countries require that.
It's a really common requirement, easy to miss.
And having a printed backup of your flight reservation or boarding pass is just smart, isn't it? Tech fails happen.
Totally. Also, travel insurance details, where you're staying, hotel reservation, or maybe a friend's contact info and payment methods. Credit cards and some cash.
Both home currency and destination currency. Euros in this case.
Yeah, having a little bit of the local cash when you land is always useful for, a coffee or a taxi right away.
The source describes this great routine, this systematic check and recheck before leaving. Documents.
Yep.
Electronics, are they charged? Health items. Weighing bags.
Yes, preventing that last-minute panic, that awful moment of, did I forget my passport?
We've all been there.
And it mentions weighing bags specifically to avoid those potentially really expensive, oversized or overweight baggage fees. And remembering comfort items too, like an eye mask or neck pillow, that whole process, it builds confidence before you even step out the door.
So speaking of stepping out the door, how does our traveler in the source actually get to the airport?
They take a taxi.
Yeah.
And the key takeaway here isn't just the method, it's the timing. The source really emphasizes leaving early and factoring in traffic. It uses that specific example, aiming for 8:30 a.m. for a 10:30 a.m. flight.
That 2-hour buffer.
Yeah.
Standard advice for international.
Exactly. It helps absorb any unexpected delays on the way.
And it introduces some useful terms around transportation, too. To hail a taxi, rideshare, airport shuttle, ETA, estimated time of arrival.
And peak traffic. Good words to know.
Knowing those helps you communicate clearly. The source gives that perfect example dialogue. Could you please take me to the airport? My flight is at 10:30, and I'd like to be there around 8:30.
Simple, polite, gets the job done.
And you feel that mix, right? The excitement building, but also a little bit of, okay, here we go.
Totally. And then you arrive at the airport. How does the source describe that first kind of sensory hit of the terminal?
It's vivid, bustling, full of energy, the sound of rolling suitcases, that unique airport hum. It uses this great analogy. Airports are like small cities.
It's so true. They have their own infrastructure, their own rhythm. And knowing the key signs and locations is like knowing the major landmarks in a city. The source points out departures versus arrivals.
Crucial distinction.
Which terminal you need, the concierge desk, and the big information board showing flight statuses. On time, delayed, boarding. Spotting those helps you orient yourself immediately.
Okay, so once you're inside, the next big step is check-in and dealing with your luggage. The source walks us through finding the counter for Airline AB.
Right. This is your first direct interaction with the airline staff. The source provides that typical back and forth. The agent asking for your passport and ticket. May I see?
Standard stuff.
You presenting them. Then the question about bags. Checking any bags. You respond, maybe yes, just one suitcase, and they instruct you to place it on the scale. Everything looks good. They hand over your boarding pass with your seat 14A in this example and gate 7.
And those phrases, may I see, checking any bags, place it on the scale, boarding pass, they're your essential vocabulary for this whole interaction.
Absolutely. And the source clarifies the difference between carry-on and checked bags.
Which is super important.
Crucial distinction. Checked goes in the plane's hold. You collect it at your destination. Carry-on stays with you in the cabin, usually fitting in the overhead bin or under the seat.
The source notes most airlines allow one carry-on and one personal item, like a backpack or purse.
Yeah, usually. And yes, reinforcing the need to check size and weight limits beforehand to avoid those potential oversized or overweight baggage fees. Nobody wants those.
No kidding. Okay, bags checked, boarding pass in hand. Now, for many people, the next part is the one that causes the most tension. Security.
Yeah, the source acknowledges that feeling head on, but by breaking down the process, it makes it feel less daunting, you know?
Exactly. It's a sequence. Stand in line, have your passport and boarding pass ready, start taking things off, shoes, belts, jackets, anything metal.
The whole routine.
Get your electronics and bags into the trays, walk to the scanner metal detector, or maybe a full body one, then wait for the, okay.
And it gives that relatable scenario. The scanner beeping, stepping aside for a quick check, realizing it was just your keys.
Happens all the time.
And the officer saying, no problem, have a safe flight. It highlights useful terms like tray, metal detector, beep, and random check.
And the absolute must-know rule, the liquids rule.
Oh, yeah. Don't forget this one.
Containers must be 100 milliliters or less, and all of them have to fit comfortably into one transparent 1-liter plastic bag.
That rule is pretty much universal now, and it trips up so many travelers.
It really does. So having successfully navigated security, the source leads us to the departure lounge.
Which it describes as potentially a favorite part of the journey.
I can see why. This is where you finally get to breathe a little, maybe relax, and you have options.
Right. The source lists the usual suspects. Duty-free shops selling everything from perfume and alcohol to chocolates and electronics.
Souvenir stores, cafes, restaurants.
Currency exchange counters and waiting areas with seats and those all-important charging points.
Always look for the charging points.
Definitely. It suggests practical ways to use this time grabbing a snack, like the sandwich and water mentioned, double-checking your flight status on the display boards, finding a restroom, or charging your devices before boarding.
And provides those useful phrases you might need. What's the exchange rate for euros? Could I have a coffee, please? Is it okay to charge my phone here?
Simple questions, but knowing how to ask them is empowering.
Yeah, makes a difference. Time in the lounge tends to fly, though, and soon you'll hear the boarding announcement. The source mentions hearing it for flight AB-123 to Paris, boarding at Gate 7.
And it explains the typical boarding stages. They usually start with passengers needing assistance or families with young children.
Group 1, usually.
Then priority boarding business class, frequent flyers, and then the rest of economy, often in groups. It's not random, it's an organized process to get everyone seated efficiently.
Right, avoids chaos in the aisles.
Hopefully. Key phrases you'll hear or use include jet bridge or tunnel that covered walkway onto the plane, the boarding pass scan when you present it at the gate, and locating your seat rows and numbers, like 14A in the example.
The gate interaction itself is usually pretty quick. Hand over your boarding pass, they scan it, wish you a good flight.
Yep. Knowing that simple sequence removes any hesitation.
And now you're on board the airplane. The source traveler finds their seat, 14A, noting it's a window seat.
Which they prefer for the views. Lots of people do.
I'm an aisle person myself, but I get the appeal.
Fair enough. Once you're settled, the onboard announcements begin. What does the source highlight about these?
Well, they cover essential safety and comfort instructions. Where to stow your carry-on overhead bins or under the seat in front of you.
Important distinction there.
Fastening your seatbelt and making sure your seat back and tray table are upright and locked for taxi, takeoff, and landing.
The standard pre-flight drill. The traveler in the source stows their larger bag but keeps a water bottle under the seat practical.
And the source gives us those vital phrases for interacting with the cabin crew, the flight attendants. Could you help me with my bag? If you need a hand lifting it.
Good one to know.
Is this seatbelt here easy to adjust? If it feels stiff, or the simple common request, could I have a bottle of water, please?
All useful. It also reminds us about the safety demonstration. Even if you fly often, watching or listening is important.
Yeah, you should pay attention.
It covers seatbelts, oxygen masks, life vests, emergency exits. Just knowing where the nearest exit is gives you that extra bit of confidence, doesn't it?
It really does. Then comes the exciting part. Taxi, takeoff, and climb. The source mentions the captain's announcement, usually including which runway you're taxiing to.
Which just means the plane moving on the ground.
Right, to get to the runway. And maybe some weather info.
And the takeoff experience itself is described really vividly. The plane rolling faster and faster, the nose lifting, that incredible feeling of acceleration.
Pushing you back in your seat.
Yeah. Climbing up through the clouds, the view changing from the city shrinking below to just clouds. That's a really powerful moment the source captures.
Once you reach in-flight cruising altitude, typically around, 35,000 feet?
Around there, yeah. The seatbelt sign usually goes off and the cabin service begins. Snacks, drinks.
The source describes activities during this time. Reading a book, listening to a podcast, maybe taking photos out the window or buying a drink or snack.
And gives a simple example interaction. Asking for tea and being offered milk or sugar.
Basic stuff.
Useful terms here include tray table, that folding table on the seat back in front of you, and turbulence.
Turbulence.
Yeah, those bumpy moments when the plane hits rough air. The crew will usually announce it, and it's generally nothing to worry about, but good to know the word.
All those onboard phases pass, and eventually you hear the announcement signaling the start of descent, usually about 30 minutes before landing. What does that signal?
Time to get ready for landing. Return to your seat if you weren't already. Fasten your seatbelt. The source describes the descent as gradual, the cabin lights often dimming.
And the view changes again as you get lower. Maybe city lights start appearing, or you see the countryside coming into focus.
Exactly. Then comes the landing. The source describes the sensation, that thump when the wheels touch the runway.
Always a relief.
The feel or sound of the reverse thrusters engaging to slow the plane down quickly and then taxiing to the gate. The source reassuringly notes that shaky landings are perfectly normal.
Good to remember. You've landed safely. Now for arrival and customs. First, exiting the aircraft.
Right. The source mentions the welcome announcement and the instruction to stay seated until the plane comes to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign is turned off.
Then you gather your carry-on, your hand luggage.
Another term for it, yep. And you disembark.
Next up is passport control and baggage claim. You follow the signs to immigration, present your passport and boarding pass to the officer, and hopefully get that stamp. Then it's off to baggage claim.
Finding your suitcase on the baggage carousel feels like a small victory.
It really does. Though the source wisely mentions the possibility, thankfully not in the story's case, of delayed or missing luggage, which can happen.
Unfortunately, yes. Essential terms here include passport control, baggage carousel, customs declaration.
Finally, entering the country. The source describes the interaction with the customs agent, who might ask, "Are you bringing any goods to declare?"
Pretty standard question. If you are, you might need to open your bag. If not, you typically say nothing to declare and use the green channel if they have one.
And with that clearance, you exit into the arrivals hall. You've successfully navigated the airport's internal process.
You made it through.
From the arrivals hall, the source lists your options for leaving the airport. Shuttle buses, maybe an airport train, taxis or ride-share zones.
Car rental desks or finding help at the airport information desks. Lots of choices usually.
The traveler in the source has the nice experience of being met by a friend waiting in the arrivals hall, holding a name board.
Yeah, that's always lovely. It even gives us that brief, warm greeting in French, "Salut, bienvenue à Paris," and the response, "Merci beaucoup, ça fait plaisir de te voir."
A nice touch showing that destination connection.
Definitely.
This deep dive, using that narrative as our guide, it really underscores how breaking down the journey into these manageable steps, armed with the right vocabulary, knowing what to expect, it just takes away so much uncertainty.
Absolutely. The source's summary highlights key terms repeatedly. Check-in desk, boarding pass, security checkpoint, flight attendant, turbulence, and useful action verbs like to board, to taxi, to fasten, to descend, to disembark, words you'll actually hear and use.
And he gives us those practical phrases ready to deploy. Could you tell me where gate 7 is? Is the seat taken? Could I have a blanket? My luggage hasn't arrived. Where can I find a currency exchange?
These are your tools for interaction, aren't they? The cultural notes the source includes are valuable too, acknowledging that while the processes are pretty universal, airports do reflect local cultures in small ways.
Yeah, the food options, maybe some regulations.
Right. And that simple politeness, excuse me, thank you, please, is understood and appreciated everywhere. Goes a long way.
The main point, pulled from this personal journey, feels so true. Flying can feel overwhelming, but knowledge really does make it manageable.
Yeah, understanding that sequence check-in, security, boarding, flight, arrival, it builds real confidence. You know what's coming next.
We've taken that narrative step by step and hopefully pulled out the practical knowledge and the language tools you need.
Because feeling prepared truly transforms the travel experience from something potentially stressful into something genuinely exciting.
It really does. So as you think about your own future travels and navigating airports, maybe consider this. Beyond the practical steps and the language we discussed, think about the airport as a place where countless stories intersect.
It's a real crossroads.
Yeah, it's this incredible hub of human connection and transition where people from all walks of life, speaking different languages, temporarily share a space. And this universal process of movement across the globe, how does understanding that shared experience maybe change how you feel about being part of it next time you're there?